SpaceX's valuation has caused quite a crazy storm, and not the one you're thinking of.
The biggest IPO the market has ever seen starts trading SpaceX.
Elon had long said he didn't really plan to take SpaceX public, but that was before the merger with xAI, before he needed tens of billions of dollars to build out these ambitions.
We will be looking for partners later this year, but if need be, I'm prepared to fund this all the way until SpaceX is the world's top launch company. Absolutely.
Elon Musk recently claimed that SpaceX could generate $1 trillion in annual revenue by 2030, making the bold prediction just 2 days after the company's stock market debut. But despite its massive valuation, SpaceX still generates far less revenue than tech giants like Broadcom and Amazon. In 2025, the company increased its revenue from $14.02 billion to $18.67 billion. Yet, it also reported a net loss of $4.94 billion, a sharp reversal from the $791 million profit it posted the previous year. Another major milestone following the IPO is SpaceX's inclusion in the Nasdaq 100 index. While that could attract billions in passive investment, some Wall Street analysts remain cautious about whether the company can grow quickly enough to justify its valuation. Earlier this month, a report noted that Goldman Sachs projects SpaceX could generate more than $470 billion in revenue by 2030, while Morgan Stanley estimates a more conservative $330 billion. Even those ambitious forecasts fall well short of Musk's $1 trillion target. Now, SpaceX does generate significant revenue from Starlink, but many analysts argue it's still nowhere near enough to justify a valuation approaching $2 trillion. At its current valuation, the company is trading at roughly 56 times its annual revenue, a level that's difficult to reconcile with traditional valuation metrics. So where does a $1.75 trillion valuation actually come from? At that price, SpaceX briefly became the 6th largest publicly traded company in the United States. For comparison, even Tesla, often criticized for being overvalued, trades at around 12 times EBITDA, while Amazon is valued at roughly 18 times EBITDA. SpaceX, by contrast, was valued at an astonishing 109 times EBITDA, giving it a richer multiple than even Berkshire Hathaway. The record-breaking valuation also pushed Elon Musk's net worth high enough to make him the world's first trillionaire, although he held that title for just 2 weeks before market movements erased it.
The filing for what could be the largest IPO in history, valuing SpaceX as much as $2 trillion.
Index funds tracking the Nasdaq 100 will have to start buying SpaceX stock whether they want to or not.
By now, you've probably seen the headlines about SpaceX's record-breaking IPO. But despite all the attention, many people still don't fully understand what the company actually does. The name suggests it's a rocket company, but rockets now make up only about 20% of its business. Today, SpaceX is really 3 businesses combined into one. The first is the business that started it all: launch services. Before SpaceX, rockets were essentially disposable. Companies would spend hundreds of millions of dollars building an incredibly sophisticated machine, launch it once, and then watch most of it fall into the ocean. SpaceX changed that by developing reusable rockets that can land, be refurbished, refueled, and flown again. One of its Falcon 9 boosters has now completed more than 34 missions, dramatically reducing the cost of reaching space. That innovation has turned SpaceX into the world's dominant space transportation company. Last year, around 80% of all the mass launched into orbit worldwide was carried by a SpaceX rocket. Its customers include NASA, the Pentagon, commercial satellite operators, and governments from around the world. But perhaps the most surprising customer is SpaceX itself. Of the more than 160 launches the company conducted last year, only around 40 were for external customers. The vast majority were dedicated to deploying Starlink, its own satellite internet constellation. That's because SpaceX realized something powerful. If you can launch payloads into orbit more cheaply than anyone else, the real opportunity isn't just selling launches. It's owning the most valuable business you can put into space. So, that brings us to Starlink, the business that has become the financial engine of SpaceX. Traditional satellite internet relied on a handful of massive satellites orbiting about 36,000 kilometers above Earth. At that distance, signals take much longer to travel, leading to the high latency that made satellite internet feel slow and unreliable. Starlink takes a completely different approach. Instead of a few giant satellites in geostationary orbit, it uses thousands of smaller satellites flying just a few hundred kilometers above the Earth in low Earth orbit. That dramatically reduces latency, making the service fast enough for activities like video calls, online gaming, and even in-flight Wi-Fi. The downside is that this model requires thousands of satellites. Building a network on that scale would be prohibitively expensive unless you can launch satellites at a fraction of the normal cost. That's exactly where SpaceX's reusable rockets give it a massive advantage. The company has now deployed more than 9,000 Starlink satellites, serving over 10 million customers across rural communities, commercial aircraft, ships at sea, and remote locations around the world. In fact, roughly 3 out of every 4 active satellites orbiting Earth today belong to Starlink. And that's a lead that's incredibly difficult for competitors to match. Companies like Amazon must pay market rates every time they launch satellites, often between $70 million and $100 million per mission. SpaceX, on the other hand, owns the launch provider. Because its rockets are reusable, each flight primarily costs fuel, refurbishment, and operations, bringing the estimated cost down to roughly $15 million to $20 million. That cost advantage fundamentally changes the economics of the business. Once the satellite constellation is in orbit, adding each new subscriber costs relatively little. As a result, Starlink has become the company's most profitable business, and the primary driver of SpaceX's earnings today. But Starlink's profits aren't just boosting SpaceX's bottom line, they're funding the company's next major bet. Earlier this year, Elon Musk merged SpaceX with xAI, bringing his artificial intelligence company under the same corporate umbrella. That merger added 3 major assets. The first is Grok, xAI's family of large language models that compete with systems like ChatGPT and Claude. The second is Colossus, one of the world's largest AI supercomputing clusters, built to train increasingly powerful models. And the third is X, formerly Twitter, which brings a platform with more than 550 million monthly active users. Together, these assets position the company to compete in the rapidly expanding AI industry. But they're also extremely expensive to operate. Last year alone, the AI division reportedly burned through around $14 billion as it invested heavily in chips, infrastructure, and model development. Even so, there are signs that those investments could begin to pay off. The company has reportedly secured major compute-related agreements with partners including Google and Anthropic, with the combined value of those contracts estimated at around $70 billion. So the obvious question is, why does an AI lab even belong inside a rocket company? The core thesis behind it is that artificial intelligence is no longer primarily constrained by chips. It's increasingly constrained by energy. Modern data centers are running into a physical limit. They simply can't draw enough power from the electrical grid to scale fast enough. SpaceX's long-term vision reframes that bottleneck entirely. Instead of building more data centers on Earth, the idea is to eventually place them in orbit, where solar panels can operate in near-continuous sunlight and avoid many of the cooling constraints that exist on the ground. But getting hardware into space at that scale requires something only one company currently has: extremely cheap, high-frequency launch capability. That's where the full system begins to connect. Rockets make launch dramatically cheaper. Cheap launch enables massive satellite deployment. Starlink then turns that infrastructure into a cash-generating business. That cash funds advanced AI development. And as AI demand for compute continues to grow, the logic extends further. Even data centers themselves could eventually be moved into orbit, deployed using the same launch system. In theory, it becomes a closed loop. Rockets enable satellites, satellites generate revenue, revenue funds AI, and AI drives demand back into space infrastructure. That is the long-term trillion-dollar vision behind SpaceX. But much of it remains unproven. The challenge is that a significant portion of the valuation depends on future systems that don't yet exist at scale. Meanwhile, Musk's AI efforts are still playing catch-up in a highly competitive field, where established models are already far ahead in capability and adoption. As a result, critics argue that a large part of SpaceX's valuation is built not on present-day earnings, but on a chain of future assumptions about industries that are still in the process of forming and technologies that have yet to be fully realized. One of the most surprising developments so far is the relative silence from Wall Street's top regulators regarding SpaceX's pending IPO, despite the company's proposed dual-class share structure that would give Elon Musk near total control over decision-making. In practical terms, that means Musk would retain what some describe as word-of-God authority over a company that would rank among the 10 largest publicly traded firms in the United States by market value. At the same time, major index providers remain divided on whether SpaceX should be included in benchmark indices. That hesitation, particularly from the S&P, has already delayed potentially billions of dollars in passive fund inflows that would normally follow a listing of this scale. There are also broader national security considerations. The Pentagon, NASA, and multiple intelligence agencies are now heavily reliant on SpaceX infrastructure for critical launch and satellite services, raising questions about how a publicly traded, privately controlled company fits into that level of strategic dependence. Some analysts argue that these tensions will ultimately need to be addressed as a matter of policy, with clearer regulatory guidance from bodies like the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. So far, however, the SEC has not publicly taken a position on the structure or implications of the IPO, according to a report from Reuters. Ultimately, becoming a public company introduces a new layer of pressure, scrutiny, regulation, and market expectations that SpaceX has never had to navigate before. And now, the real test is about to begin.